New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is parapsychology and the skeptics. With me is Professor Stanley Krippner, who is the Alan Watts Professor of Psychology at Saybrook University in San Francisco. Stanley is also the co-author of a classic book of parapsychology called Dream Telepathy. He is the editor of a very important series of books in parapsychology called Advances in Parapsychology, and the editor of a wonderful anthology called Debating Psychic Experience. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You seem to have a friendlier working relationship with skeptics than many other parapsychologists have. I think your book, Debating the Skeptics, for example, shows a lot of respect for what contributions skeptics might be able to make to the research. On the other hand, a lot of parapsychologists, and I'll have to put myself into this category, I tend to think that most people who profess to be skeptics are debunkers. They're not real skeptics in a true philosophical sense at all to me. They seem to have their minds made up in advance that everything associated with parapsychology has to be incorrect.
Yeah, first of all, I think the word skeptic is a very honorable word. I think that all of us in parapsychology are, or at least should be, skeptics. Also, I think debunker is an honorable word. In politics, there's a role for debunking. Mm-hmm. I think a better word is scoffers. Scoffers are people who are not very serious, who have a knee-jerk reaction to something they don't like. So I prefer to call these people scoffers. And that's my preferred term.
Well, that's a point, because the very word debunk assumes there's some bunk that needs to be attacked or removed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my relationship with scoffers actually goes back to my time at the University of Wisconsin in the 1950s, when I was the chair of the Student Forum Committee that brought in invited speakers, mm-hmm. and I wanted to invite J.B. Ryan, who, of course, at that time was director of the Parapsychology Laboratory at Duke University. And
considered the founder of American parapsychology.
Yes, and he invented the word parapsychology, and I'd had a admiration for him for many, many years, even mm-hmm. though we had never met. So I got the committee to agree, and we could not get any money from the university lecture series, so we knew we'd have to raise the money ourselves. And we wrote to Dr. Ryan, and he said, "See, you want me so badly. I'm giving a talk to the American Chemical Society in Chicago, and I can take a train up and talk to your group, mm-hmm. and then go back to Chicago and take my flight back to North Carolina." Mm-hmm. So we agreed, and we picked him up at the train station, and in the meantime, we did massive publicity, and we were met with, indeed, a great deal of scoffing from the psychology department. One of the psychologists said, "If you invite Dr. Ryan to speak, your next speaker should be a faith healer, Father Divine, who was well known at the time, to speak on recent advances in the art of healing."
Mm-hmm. Good idea, huh?
Yes. Another professor told his students, "If you want to hear about parapsychology, which I think is a horse's ass. You can go and hear it from the greatest ass of them all. And, many other very, very discourteous, unprofessional statements. Yeah. Now, the night of the lecture, it was storming outside. There was a competing play going on at the theater. Nevertheless, we had a full house. J.B. Ryan gave one of the most inspiring speeches that I'd heard. The student who was going to introduce him decided not to because he was a psychology student, and he thought his professors would take it out on him if he introduces Ryan, so I introduced him myself. So that was a first-hand experience with the scoffers. At Northwestern University, where I did my graduate work, I invited him up to speak for the School of Education, where I was getting my degree, at the Honorary Society banquet, and he agreed that we had the money to bring him, and the chair of the psychology department absolutely forbade any of his professors to come and hear his speech. Again, you wouldn't think that this was courteous or professional. One of the professors came anyway. He disagreed with Ryan, but he came anyway. They had a very courteous interchange, and that professor went on to become a president of the American Psychological Association. He was a free thinker. So, over the years, once I started the work in dream telepathy at Maimonides Medical Center, of course I ran into a lot of scoffers, a lot of criticism of the work, almost all of it unfounded, except for the one criticism that it was not easily replicable. So, don't disagree with that. But there were incredible charges that we showed people the pictures before we sent them to the dreamer, that we cheated and did the statistics wrong, while all the statistics were done by people outside of the laboratory. Just one error after another that I pulled together in a chapter for a book, Mental Imagery to Arms, edited by Jane Gockenbach, which was about unusual dream phenomena. So, over the years, I have had a number of, shall we say, unprofessional insults from scoffers. Victor Stegner, the famous physicist, called me a charlatan in an interview, and somebody said, a charlatan? Oh yes, Krippner's the biggest charlatan of them all, which I took as sort of an honor. And then C.E.M. Hansel, a British psychologist, in his book, which debunked parapsychology, said that the people had been shown the picture before the telepathy started, which was a complete fabrication.
You bring them into the dream laboratory, show them the picture, and say, we want to see if you're going to have a dream about this picture.
Can you imagine? Yes. And that misstatement still exists on Wikipedia to this day. It has taken on a life of its own. Yes. Obviously,
it's to create the image of you as a parapsychologist of being a complete idiot.
Absolutely. Many people corrected Hansel. He came out with the same statement as the revision of the book.
Yeah.
So, also, Paul Kurtz, who was a brilliant philosopher.
One of the founders of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of the Claims of the Paranormal.
That's right.
A group of debunkers.
And he gave me the Silver Spoon Award for having a spoon in my mouth in terms of my absurd statements about parapsychology. Well, none of those people ended up in the book because they've all now passed away. So, as is famously said, about the dead, lest nothing negative be said. So the people who have survived, I'm on friendly terms with, and I invited them to contribute chapters to the book. One of them, James Alcock from Canada, one of them, Christopher French from England, Michael Shermer from California, and Ray Hyman from Oregon, and Richard Wiseman from England.
These are all prominent skeptics.
All prominent skeptics. They all wrote very, very fine articles. They all appear in the book, along with parapsychologists making their statement. And then this is the first, the two of them debate each other. And they debate each other all gloves off, bare-knuckle debates. It's
point by point.
You bet. Very, very spirited books.
Yeah.
I made very sure that the scoffers would have the same number of words as the proponents. I called them proponents and I called them advocates and counter-advocates. And the name of the book is Debating Psychic Experiences. And so we got pretty good reviews of the book. Of course, it was ignored by most of the mainstream scientific organizations, which is a pity, and was not even highlighted by the skeptical organizations themselves, which is a pity. But I was so happy that I was able to have good collaboration with people who are in the book. Now, of course, the most, shall we say, the best-known scoffer is the amazing Randi, and he was not an academic, so he doesn't appear in the book. But I've actually gotten along pretty well with him over the years, and he recently gave an interview to a magazine who had a feature article about me, and everybody was talking about such positive things about me. They said, well, the person who's bound to say something negative is the amazing Randi. So he came out with the statement, in this field, there are so few people you can depend upon, but I can always depend upon Stan because he is completely unbiased.
Oh. Yeah,
very nice compliment from Randi. And I think the reason for that is whenever he makes a misstatement, I point it out to him. And I'm a confrontational person. I wish more people would be confrontational with me. There are many people who I used to know who will not even answer my emails because they don't want a confrontation with me. But I really push and shove. Randi made 3 incorrect statements. He backed down. He apologized for all 3. So I think I have his respect.
Well, there's something to be said about the willingness of many of these skeptics to engage in the phenomena itself. Most people who are scoffers are scoffing for the very purpose of not having to engage.
Exactly. The reason they don't engage is they know they'd lose in the debate because they know so little about the field.
Well, that and because they're already convinced it's not worth their time to begin with.
That's right. At least Ray Hyman is informed.
Yeah.
And so you can have an intelligent discussion with him. And James Alcock is fairly well informed. You can have an intelligent discussion with him. Michael Shermer has done a lot of books on other topics. In fact, I'm a member of his Skeptics Society. Now, I disagree with him on parapsychology, but I completely agree with him on the importance of Charles Darwin, for example. His book on Why People Believe Strange Things is a very valuable book. So he has made some contributions that are quite salubrious. And so, I've had conversations with him in person. We agree on more than we disagree with. Just like some people in politics. I have friends who are die-hard Republican reactionaries. I get along with them fine in other areas. Yes, we disagree on politics, but we can remain friends on other topics. I think the one exception is, in politics, I always think, they might be right. In parapsychology, no, they can't be right. I'm 99% convinced that parapsychological effects are real. You did a poll a while back, and much to your surprise, you and other people have found the same thing. About 1/3 of people who are in the Parapsychological Association can't say unequivocally that they think that psi phenomena exist.
That's right, yeah.
No, I'm not one of those 1/3.
Nor am I.
No, I'm 99%. Yeah. I always leave a 1% margin of error. But I don't fight with people on it. I don't fight with people on it because they're not well informed enough to fight, and I think there are more important things to fight about. I will fight on people on other issues. On the topic of evolution, yes, I will fight with the creationists and the scientific, the so-called scientific creationist group. They're completely wrong. I have no patience with them whatsoever. People that don't believe that AIDS is the result of a virus, I completely disagree with them, and I will fight with them. people who are homophobic, anti-feminist, I will fight with them. Racist, I will fight with them. These are the issues that I will fight for. Parapsychology, I will listen respectively. I'll state my point of view, but I think it's non-productive to have a fight with them.
Well, the interesting thing is that from time to time, the skeptics who debate with parapsychologists help to improve the research. I'm thinking of the collaboration between your late colleague Charles Honorton and Ray Hyman, where they worked together to come up with a better protocol, a tighter protocol for the Ganzfeld research.
Absolutely right. And so that shows how the critics, and there I'll use the critic in the honorable sense of the word, critics like Ray Hyman and Charles Honor were able to work together to come up with something very helpful. Another example that's not so well known was when John Beloff was working with a young man in Scotland who claimed to be able to bend spoons. Mm-hmm. And he worked with James Randi to develop a foolproof protocol so that he would give the young man a piece of metal in a sealed test tube container, and the young man would bring back a bent metal, and it was still sealed. Mm-hmm. So what Randi did was to seal the tube himself with a little hair coming out of the tube. And so if the seal were broken and re-waxed, that hair would be gone.
Oh, yes.
And so Beloff gave the young man the tube, and he brought the tube back with the bend in it, but the hair was not there. So Beloff knew that he was cheating, and upon pressure, the young man agreed. That was the famous Project Beta of Randi's fame.
I see.
So there was a chance where the two of them collaborated to very, very good effect. Mm-hmm. I was actually in Randi's home in New Jersey when he told me the results of this. And I had a very interesting dinner with the amazing Randi. And he did a card trick for me and for John Beloff. And the card trick was so amazing that Beloff came close, thank heavens he didn't, came close to thinking that maybe Randi had some psychic ability himself.
People said the same about Houdini, who was a famous scoffer.
Right. And I said to John, look, give me some time, John. I'm going to figure that trick out. Mm-hmm. And so I took that trip, went through my magic books. I have a background in amateur magician, being an amateur magician in my younger days. I went to some professional magicians. I wrote Randi a step-by-step description of how he had done the trick. Mm-hmm. And he wrote back saying, you have it almost figured out. I'm never going to do that trick to you again, or you will completely figure it out. So I sent that to John Beloff, mm-hmm. and that convinced him, no, Randi doesn't have any innate psychic ability. That is a masterful piece of legerdemain, but it is legerdemain nevertheless.
Well, many people I encounter, particularly on the internet, are convinced that parapsychological phenomenon cannot exist because Randi has never given his supposed $1 million prize to anybody who would demonstrate anything paranormal to his satisfaction. How do you answer that?
If you look carefully at the conditions for the $1 million prize, you actually find that he sets the bar pretty high. Mm-hmm. First of all, you have to pay all of the expenses yourself, which very few psychics or parapsychologists can do. Also, he has had some individuals come to take the test, and they've failed, and probably deservedly so. And so setting the bar as high as he did makes it very, very unlikely that that bar will be jumped. Mm-hmm. Amir Ahmadin, the claimant medium I worked with Brazil, who produced apports involuntarily.
About which we've done a separate interview.
That's right. He said he would be happy to appear for Randi, and he would actually strip down and do it naked so that Randi would see that he didn't have any hidden apps or apports on his body. That never happened once I told him he'd have to pay the expenses. But he was willing to do it if somebody else would pay the expenses.
I see. Well, there's an opportunity missed.
That's a shame, right?
Yeah.
Because he said, I don't care if Randy is a skeptic. I can perform in front of people that don't believe in what I'm doing. I do it all the time. And again, remember that Amir was not in control of the phenomena. He depended upon the spirits. And so I think that $1 million claim is not really what it appears to be. And so don't let people use that as an argument that psychic phenomena are not real.
Well, Amir is unusual in the fact that he felt that he could produce phenomenon around skeptics. That's pretty rare. I mean, there's a lot of research that on the experimenter effect in parapsychology that suggests that experimenters who have a negative or hostile attitude are not going to get good results. In fact, that's probably true across all the behavioral sciences.
You get what you believe. Some people say you get what you see, it goes further, or you see what you believe. It's also you believe what you see what you believe.
Well, and that's an argument used by skeptics to distrust any researcher who reports a positive effect.
That's right.
They're biased to begin with.
Yes. Perhaps the most notable claim to fame that Randi has is the so-called Project Alpha. And I can spend just a few minutes telling you about my role in Project Alpha. Briefly put, Peter Phillips of the Parapsychology Laboratory in St. Louis, Missouri at Washington University advertised for people who could do metal bending. He thought this would be something that could easily demonstrate the reality of psi phenomena.
And he was a physicist. So.
He was a physicist, right. Very well equipped to do that. Of all the people who applied, 2 young men seemed to have the best credentials, and so they were invited in, not knowing that they were actually plants of Randi. And they did...
Trained in magic.
Trained in magic, yes. And they immediately did some feats that were well worth investigating, bending metal and the like. They also did some ESP tests. Incidentally, they did get some very good results on the ESP tests, which is rarely mentioned, which is well looking at, because those results could not have been the result of magic easily explained. But those are forgotten about because the publicity went to the metal bending. So Peter Phillips showed some preliminary films at the Parapsychological Association meeting, and I thought, my God, this would all be done by sleight of hand. Doesn't he realize that? And so I was in the St. Louis area, and William Broad was also at the St. Louis area. So we agreed to come and interview the 2 alleged psychics.
William Broad being another parapsychologist.
That's right. Yes, and a very distinguished one, and he's no longer with us, unfortunately. But anyway, the 2 young psychics came and interviewed us. They didn't do any demonstrations for us. We just wanted to have an interview, and they continually put down Randi, and that was a clue to me that, yes, indeed, they might be stooges of Randi. Now, I made one mistake. Randi had said, if anybody asks you if you're working for me, tell them you are. But they won't. They won't suspect it. I suspected it, but I never confronted them, which I should have done, But both William Broad and I, independently, were convinced that they were fakes. We didn't know if they were stooges for Randi, but they, the way they gave their responses and the demeanor of them, it was like it was an act. It was like show business, like they had been coached. We actually wrote letters to Peter Phillips, and I have copies of the letters saying, don't publish anything that these guys have done because we think they're fakes. And thank heavens Peter Phillips didn't publish anything. once Randi discovered that they were not going to be published, then he had a press conference with the two young men saying that Project Alpha was successful. He had planted psychics in the laboratory, and they were able to fool Peter Phillips.
And the publicity was so devastating that the laboratory shut down.
Yes, it was a shame. It was devastating. Now, there's a little footnote to this. I was taking a group from the Institute of Noetic Sciences to Peru to visit Machu Picchu, to visit the wonderful stone buildings in Peru, etc. Was after a trip to Brazil.
The ancient Incan architecture is amazing.
Yes, it is. On the airplane ride back, somebody looked at the New York Times and said, "Stan, you're quoted in the New York Times." Now, I should mention, before I went to Peru, I was public relations director of the Parapsychological Association at the time. I left a statement saying, if Randi comes out and announces that this is a hoax, say that I was well aware of it, and that I warned him, also William Brown was aware of it, and that Peter Phillips had never come to a definitive conclusion.
Yes.
So I thought that would protect parapsychology. That for some reason or another, the Parapsychological Association never published that statement, even though it was in the hands of the president at the time.
But what was in the New York Times that cited you?
Instead, the New York Times, that somebody in the airplane showed me, gave a statement attributed to me saying, this was a brilliant strategy on Randi's part, and I think we all can learn something from it. That statement was never learned by me. That statement was made by Mark Schaefer, one of the research associates of Peter Phillips.
I see. And at the end of the day, Randi used this occasion to publicize his antagonism. It was a big setback for the field.
That's right.
Yeah. Was Stan...
if I would have been able to afford a lawyer, I would have sued for libel. When I brought this attention to the New York Times, they said, yes, our reporter made a mistake. They did publish a retraction on page 28 of the New York Times, 3-sentence retraction, which, of course, very few people read.
Stan, our time is up. I know we could go on for a long, long time about the debate over psychic phenomenon, and because it goes back for 150 years.
Yes,
there's an enormous history. Thank you so much for being with me.
You're so welcome.
And thank you for being with us.